We're going to move on to this week's topic, which is consciousness and human challenges. And I believe, if I remember right, after speaking for far too long, we're starting off with Dr. Babka. All right, and I'm going to let Dr. Babka take it away, introduce herself a bit. One of my dear colleagues, and we've worked together on a few things, and you're in for a treat. So take it away, Dr. Babka, and enjoy this last time we have together before you start your official careers at USD in a few weeks.
Thank you. That's so true. All the things that Dr. Terrell just told you, I tell my students as well. Fake it till you make it. I teach in the Theology and Religious Studies department here at USD, and a lot of students walk into my classes the first day grumbling because they don't want a THRS requirement and they don't know why they have to take this class. But hopefully, if you fake it till you make it, we can convince you that some subjects are really worth your time. And so I'm going to share my presentation with you. Here we go. Let's hope it all works. There we are. So you can see it, hopefully. Okay. So the question that I'm asking is whether qualia can be quantified. And we're going to talk today a little bit about what qualia are and whether we can think about qualia in terms of artificial intelligence, and whether what is needed for artificial intelligence, things like algorithms, computation, can actually have anything to do whatsoever with qualia. So the first part is going to look at the mystery of conscious experience. And the mystery of conscious experience has to do with two things that we're also going to talk about, and that's mystery, which is something that in theology and religious studies we're really concerned about. We're concerned about what it means to face the unknown. We're concerned with what it means to consider the reality of things, and whether, we can talk about something like God or something like a spirit could possibly be real. Pablo Picasso said that computers are useless. They can only give you answers. And I think that that's an important thing to think about in light of what Dr. Terrell was saying about your education here at USD, that we don't want to just give you answers. We want to help you actually question your reality, question reality around you, question truth, question what these things mean. And so my question, obviously, in a lot of my classes has to do with what is real. How do we get to that idea of reality? And part of the problem with getting to reality is your conscious experience is all that there is for you. All that you have in the world is your own experience of the world. Without consciousness, there is nothing at all. There is no world, there is no self, there's no interior or exterior experience. Everything that is perceived in some way by something conscious. Everything that is real appears. All these sorts of ideas are explored in what's called phenomenology, which is a branch of philosophy, which is something that is one of my specialties. So phenomenology tries to understand the nature of experience. What does it mean to have experience? So there are phenomena. Phenomena are appearances of things, and there are receivers of phenomena, or conscious beings. The interaction between phenomena and conscious beings make up what is real. And of course, the word phenomena comes from the Greek phenomenon, which simply means appearance. And so we're dealing constantly with how things appear to us in our experience of them, and whether that appearance has anything to do with the reality of that object. And so we can ask the question that the philosopher Thomas Nagel asked quite a while ago now: what's it like to be a bat? And he was asking this question because bats process sensory information through echolocution, which is sending sound waves out and feeling them bounce off. We have no subjective experience of how a bat senses the world around them, but we do have scientific information about their brains. And that's not my specialty. I'm not a neurologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I can't tell you the scientific understanding of a brain, but I do love to learn about those things. David Chalmers calls that scientific data about a bat's brain the easy problem of consciousness, because we can do an experiment. We can set up an electrode on their brain or something to give us information or data about the brain. But science can't tell us what it's like to be a bat. Chalmers calls this the hard problem of consciousness, because the way bats and humans process sensory information is so different. We have no access to the way bats understand the world. So we have no conception at all of the subjective interior side of the bat experience of the world. That's the hard problem of consciousness, according to Chalmers. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is originally referred to as simply awareness or shared or private knowledge. Self-consciousness refers to the awareness of oneself as a subject. Class consciousness is awareness of belonging to a particular economic group. But the term consciousness has evolved to refer to the inner experience of our own mental state, or the perceptions, feelings, sensations, and thoughts that make up the what it's like to be you. Because even though you and I are humans, presumably, we have very different experiences of the world. And I can never know the what it's like to be you, even though as a human, I can have some analogous way into that. So this inner experience is very difficult to describe to someone else. It's very difficult for someone else to understand another person's inner life, inner experience. Even if we may share similar events, similar experiences of events, we're going to have ultimately a different experience of them. So this pertains to what are called qualia. Qualia are qualities of experience. The singular is quala. What a given experience is like then from the inside of a subject. This is what we mean by conscious experience. Qualia are multifaceted, they're always sensory, and they're always embodied. In other words, you have to have a body to have qualia. An experience can have a phenomenal character or a qualitative feel, but qualia escape algorithmic programming, which gets us to the artificial intelligence question. If you can't formulate an algorithm to explain, for example, the experience of biting into an orange, you can't write software to duplicate that experience in a computer. An entity is conscious if it has experiential properties. This is why the question of whether artificial intelligence is conscious is kind of an ongoing debate among computer scientists, psychologists, and so on. The totality of the experiential properties of an entity are the what it's like to have consciousness. Robert J. Marks writes, if the experience of biting an orange cannot be described to a person without the senses of taste and smell, how can a computer programmer expect to duplicate qualia experiences in a computer using computer code? If the true experience can't be explained, it is non-algorithmic and therefore non-computable. There are devices called artificial noses and tongues that detect chemicals like the molecules associated with an orange, but these sensors experience no pleasure when the molecules are detected. They experience no qualia. Duplicating qualia, for Marx, his argument, is beyond the capability of AI. And maybe someday they'll figure something out about that, but right now, that's not the case. Part 2, art, ambiguity, and mystery. And you're seeing here a photograph of the artist Marcel Duchamp, who was one of the founders of the so-called Dada movement early in the 20th century. And he's sitting in front of his famous fountain at the Pasadena Art Museum, and we'll take a look at Fountain in just a minute. But I wanted to talk a bit about this piece. This is called the Lion Man or the Lion Human. This is carved out of mammoth ivory using a flintstone knife. It's about 40,000 years old. So it's one of the oldest pieces of art that we have still surviving. It estimates that it took 400 hours to produce this work. It's the oldest known evidence of religious belief in the world. And if you take a class with me, we might talk about why that is a little bit more in depth. But it's the idea that a human is able to mash together different things, a lion's head and a human's body, and basically think in a way beyond any other animal that was in existence or possibly still in existence at the time. So the wear on that body is caused by handling. They think that it was used in a ritual sort of situation, maybe part of a group experience. And so it's something that relates to this idea of what it means for human beings to be creative in a way that other beings currently are not. This is Duchamp's fountain. This is actually a urinal that was turned upside down and placed on a pedestal, as you see here. The original work has been lost. There are reproductions. There's a reproduction, I believe, still at LACMA in LA. And so he signed it R. Mutt, 1917. Nobody is quite sure why he signed it that. But it's the idea that if we take something in our everyday life and turn it upside down or change it in some way, we mash together ideas about it. And that's what made it one of the most important pieces of art in the 20th century. It changed art. It changed everything about what it means to talk about art. And so if we think about that creativity, that originality that took to create this, we think that there's something vividly important, vividly significant, as Celia Rabinovich says, in transforming something into something that can take us into a different place. So identifying creativity and human expression means searching for the surprise, searching for the radically new. And in order to understand something about why Duchamp is so important, I wanted to talk a little bit about the David. And the David in Florence is one of the most famous pieces of art because David is sort of the patron saint of Florence. And here we see an early version of David by Donatello. And if you notice here, David is standing fully clothed before the head of Goliath, who he's just killed. So if you know the biblical story, young David takes a slingshot and kills Goliath, who is terrorizing his village. And he does so with one shot of the slingshot. If he missed, he would have been killed. And so we see here the triumph of David after he does the deed. This is another version of David, also done by Donatello. Here he's taken the clothes off. He's shown that the figure is vulnerable in a way that the other piece doesn't show that. But we still have the head of Goliath at his feet, and we see some idea that he's just cut the head off with the sword. But if you look at Michelangelo's David, you see something very different. You see nakedness, obviously, because we are still highlighting the vulnerability of David. We see his beauty maybe in a new way with how Michelangelo has depicted him. But we're seeing something else. We're seeing no head of Goliath, because what we're seeing that Michelangelo has done and why he's creatively changed the narrative of this piece is that we see David the moment before he takes his shot. Right here, he's just contemplating taking that shot. The pose is contrapposto. The figure stands with full weight on one leg. The other leg is forward, causing the hips and shoulders to rest in opposing angles, giving a slight S curve to the torso, which also gives an energy to the figure that maybe wasn't quite present in the Donatello pieces. But we also see the look in his eye. And we see something about that sense, the tension, that we don't know if he'll succeed in this piece. The other pieces, triumph, he succeeded, killed the giant. Here, we don't know if he will succeed. He doesn't know if he'll succeed. And it's that ambiguity, it's that tension that gives this piece so much power. Paul Tillich wrote, facing the God who is really God means facing the total threat of non-being. That basic anxiety, the anxiety of a finite being over the threat of non-being, can't be eliminated. There's nothing we can do to get rid of that anxiety. It belongs to existence itself. So science, computation, algorithms can explain or describe qualia in their totality. One has to experience an orange to grasp the meaning of eating an orange, and then it's only how that is significant for them. It's not significant for anyone else. It's not universal. The same is true for romantic love or the discovery of something you're passionate about, such as surfing or playing the guitar. These are multifaceted sensory experiences that defy any easy or data-driven explanation or description. Intuition, creativity, and the nature of art as an attempt to express the uniqueness of how one experiences the world, all of these things are impossible to put into terms that AI can replicate or produce. In order to have qualia, a computer would have to be embodied, feel pleasure and pain, and have a sense of a limitation like death. All have the sensory capabilities that an animal has, as well as be vulnerable and mortal. So all the things that make life worth living, dogs, chocolate, climbing mountains, falling in love, are multisensory and complex phenomenal experiences that defy logic and objective description. Recognizing subtleties of meaning, the shared language of humor in a culture or between friends, the acknowledgement of ambiguity, the beauty of metaphor and poetry, the thrill of looking up into a 1,000-foot ceiling in a cathedral are all part of the wonder that is human life. Something AI can regurgitate or simulate, but not experience. AI cannot know what it is like to question, why am I here? Or why did I get out of bed this morning to come to class? AI can't do that for itself. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I feel like that got us set up quite deep. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now. It's
Sorry, my dog is just barking up a storm over here, so I was trying to save you from them. I think she's apologies. This is what it was like all through the pandemic. One time my child actually crawled out of the dog door while I was teaching class, so things are better than they were. So thank you so much, and sorry about the dog in the background, Dr. Babka. And now we'll bring in Dr. Usher to talk about AI, politics, and misinformation.
But is it a real Zoom chat if a dog or a child doesn't make an
the dog, right? So I gave
yeah.
my
So
wife gave her a treat to calm her down. Anna.
Yeah. See, so for qualia, we are
I feel
present.
like you deserve to see a dog after having to listen to the dog bark.
Yeah. So hi, I am delighted to be here. I'm Dr. Usher, and I'm in the Department of Communication. I use they, them pronouns. I'm not going to be talking about the nature of consciousness, but I am going to be talking about some of the things we use our consciousness for, which is processing and thinking about information. And more importantly, something that makes us fundamentally human, which is our ability to use language, right? So that's the connection I'm going to work on here. So you've already had some really interesting and important conversations so far about the challenges that AI poses to our democratic system. And so I want to kind of continue those and maybe wrap them up a little bit more and talk about it in the context of communication as a discipline. So my specific teaching and research interests focus on the intersection of new technology, journalism, and politics, mostly in the US context. So today, I just want to give you a plug for communication as a field, but also what we're doing here at USD. Then give you a bit of the vocabulary and background for understanding what people like to call information disorder, but you may have heard of as misinformation or fake news. And then kind of to speak to that nature of agency and choice, and determining what is real, kind of what we can do, regardless of whether you're in communication or if you're just experiencing and living in the world, during this sort of challenging US election period, and the challenging information environment for 2024. So first, I know that when I was looking at universities, I didn't actually know what a communication major was. It's not a subject you've necessarily had before. And here's a really big definition of communication. I think you'll see sort of the vast definition helps it become malleable because fundamentally everything at its core is communication. At least I feel that way. So at its foundation, communication focuses on how people use messages to generate meaning within and across various contexts. And it's the discipline that studies all forms, modes, media, and consequences of communication through humanistic, social scientific, and aesthetic inquiry. So that means we've got lots of different methodologies from quantitative to qualitative to even thinking about emotion and art and cognition when we study communication. And communication also becomes a lens to look at culture, history, power, society, and technological change. So for me, it's this super flexible lens for looking at the world. And I also think for somebody who isn't a technician, for somebody who isn't a computer scientist, but if you're interested in technology, communication is an amazing sort of place to start. So just some like overview, again, just giving you a sense of this because I had no idea what communication was when I was entering college. Things that we talk about nonverbal communication. So an example of that would be how the Harris campaign there's a lot of smiling happening, right? And that is something we would study in communication. We look at how organizations communicate. We look at media theory, media effects, advertising, journalism studies, intercultural communication, science and technology studies, political communication. So really human-computer interaction, right? So there's like sort of a broad way of thinking about communication, and we teach classes across all of these different sort of subtopics. So that's my word cloud. Now, in an effort to get in the spirit of using AI, and to show you some of the weaknesses, I guess, and what AI can do, what isn't real about AI, to pick up on what Dr. Babka was saying, I actually went to our Microsoft Copilot, which you have the ability to use through USD. And I was like, I want to make like a graphic that has all the possible jobs that you might be able to get in communication. Also to give us some words to understand what communication helps us do, right? This was the AI generated graphic that I got after maybe 30 minutes of trying to tweak and refine. You can see that it did not spell possibilities correctly or endless. And communication is also spelled wrong. So sometimes when we think about, oh my gosh, AI is going to take over the role of communication, we're never going to need people in communication, right? Press releases, create ads, any of these things. That is just, I think we're very, very far away from that. And part of that is the human experience. So just to give you a sense very quickly of things people do with communication degrees, people work in marketing and advertising, social justice, counseling, scientific research. They go into journalism. They work for government, non-government organizations, go into education. So in any event, there are dozens of ways, anything that you can do with communication, you can do with a communication degree. So that's my big pitch. And I think it's important just for setting the groundwork for what we're talking about today as the essence of what makes us human. So to the meat of why we're actually here. So if communication helps us look at messages and meaning, it can help us think a lot about how to better understand politics and digital technology, and hopefully bring together a bit of what you've been talking about these past few weeks. So kind of to back up, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what misinformation is, what disinformation is, what AI has to do with this, and why we care. So in the brief time that we have, we'll answer all of these questions, or we won't, but we'll start to. So I just want to back up a second and ask like why we're so worried about these deep fakes, about misinformation, about fake news. And the connection here really is that democracy imagines people participating in government and their communities and turning to reliable and trustworthy information to help them navigate how to make decisions about politics and how to understand the world beyond their immediate experience. We do know, of course, that people rely on more than just information to make these decisions. They rely on emotion and identity, right? But on a very basic level, bad information is a problem, especially if it's about elections, which are, as Dr. Dominguez talked about, the cornerstone of democracy. So if there's information out there that suggests an election isn't fair, that's a huge problem, because if people believe that, then the essence of the democratic project is threatened. So when we think about information generally, and this is like all the content of media, journalism, entertainment, any art, right? Music, offline and online. One way to think about this is as an information ecosystem, kind of like your environmental ecology, right? You've got an ecosystem of information that is living in the world. And what we have today is a pretty disordered information environment. I really hate this term fake news because I think it sort of undermines the nature of, verifiable journalism. And I want to think more like I like and people in communication who study this field like to use information disorder because it's kind of like a way of talking about the whole problem, and to give us a common language. And there are a couple of different types of information disorder. And I think that the precision is really helpful in identifying the potential harm and sort of the potential consequences of, like who's behind this and what effect it might have. So the first is misinformation. And these are just sort of the unintentionally bad information that's out there, inaccurate captions, dates, stats. Sometimes when you see a clickbaity kind of headline, false connection, maybe taking some satire like The Onion seriously. So this is like innocent bad information, but it's still wrong, right? And then there's disinformation, which is not so innocent. This is the stuff of conspiracy theory, the fake facts that people use to distort how we understand ongoing events, and it is intentionally created to mislead, right? So this stuff is meant to mess you up. It is fake because it's intended to give you a false impression of the world. And then there's malinformation, and this actually can sometimes be real. So Dr. Beck talked a little bit about explicit deepfakes, right? Pornographic deepfakes. Those are taking something slightly real, and sometimes they are manipulated and sometimes they are not. Sometimes it is documents like your address or your personal details being linked. But really what this is all about is the deliberate publication of private information with the intent of hurting somebody. And usually it's about a personal reputation. So, this is not new. And just to remind you that misinformation and disinformation have been with us for a really long time. So in sort of the OG true crime, that's a cartoon from around the time of the Victorian era England, Jack the Ripper was apparently like just a lie, even though it was like great stories about, innocent people being murdered in the street. In World War I, there was disinformation circulating that Germans were taking cadavers from the front and turning them into other war material in their factories. And then we've got some like 90s era disinformation of like sort of, I think, of a very innocent sort in retrospect, with Hillary Clinton adopting an alien baby. So if you grew up in the 80s and 90s like I did, you would have seen this on the sort of shelves in the grocery and the checkout aisle. Okay, so what's different now is that the information that's out there, there's a lot more of it, and it's a lot more complicated. And it's especially different because the reaching capacity for being able to directly target and personalize the most interested and most likely to believe the content is something that we're able to do algorithmically through the data that you're generating for us and through the matching that happens from people trying to target and influence you. And I think it's important to actually say that while information disorder has real consequences, information alone is not what causes all of this. So This is a picture of the insurrection that I stole from Reuters, but I did give a credit. And then what I want to just kind of bring this all together is to say that you start with some of this information disorder, conspiracy theories that can be shared digitally via social media, via traditional news media, and then your pre-existing beliefs about how the world works, right? So it's this information existing with your worldview, right? And then the cultural and social context in which you interpret this, right? And for some people, that led to their participation in the insurrection. So your understanding of what is real, right, is based on this information. And it's based on who you are and where you are, just to kind of put it in some of what Dr. Babka's terms might have been. Okay, so generative AI. There's a lot of fears around election 2024. And I think these can pretty much be summarized into three big ones. The first is the fact that anybody can make this information at scale. And and anybody has access to like this free software, right? The content is getting harder and harder to distinguish what is real. So it was a great tell when Princess Kate had too many fingers or whatever it was, but that is getting harder and harder. This is getting better and better. And then it's also being highly personalized and better targeted to the people most likely to be influenced. So what's the worst case result? That somehow there's some nature in which people believe the election's been manipulated because people have made choices on faulty premises. The doubt in the integrity of the election grows, and boom, democracy is under assault. Not good. Okay, and you've seen some of this just to remind you of what we're talking about. Joe Biden's voice being faked to sort of interfere with voter mobilization. This is an AI-generated image that was actually created by a journalist who was testing some of this software. He put it out on Twitter being like, this is fake, but wow, look at my new software. And it sped up so quickly through the web, through social media, that many people actually didn't realize this was a fake image, right? So you've been talking about some of this throughout the course. So what can we do? Because it is super messy. How can we regain our hold over what is real? And so I want to give you a couple of quick tactics. The first thing, and I think that this correlates well with what Dr. Babka was saying, is that you need someone human to push the button, right? Some of this AI, generative AI, this misinformation and disinformation isn't just coming out of nowhere. It's emerging from people. And who are these people? Who are these bad actors? Just to give you a sense, and I think it's helpful to know who's behind these influence operations, right? Conspiracy theorists, white nationalists. There's a dark corner of the internet called the men's rights, which would prefer that female-bodied people had no rights. Trolls just trying to cause trouble. Radical extremists of all political philosophies. People who are just bored on the internet trying to have fun. Actual propagandists like Russians, Iranians, who are trying to undermine the United States, and sometimes journalists who actually amplify some of this disinformation by trying to like, whoa, this terrible thing happened. This is totally fake. You should know about it. Accidentally, journalists kind of get wrapped up in promoting some of the disinformation in the system. And that's something actually I'm studying a lot about right now. Okay, so that's one thing. Know that somebody has to push the button and know who those people are. Part two is how can you take agency over what is real by kind of critically consuming content. I think my big takeaway is if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. So I really wish the Pope had worn a puffer jacket earlier this year. I don't know if you saw this image, but sadly the Pope did not wear a puffer jacket because it was like, and that was like too good to be true. Like that would have been amazing, right? So here are some quick tactics that you can kind of use. The first is to just kind of like, don't take something at face value. Just don't look at a headline. You should read something or watch more of the video before you make and really understand, make a decision about whether it's accurate. You're going to want to know where this is coming from. So is it coming from an influencer's YouTube channel? And that influencer is really just somebody who does a lot of work on makeup and now they're talking about politics? Or is it coming from the TikTok channel of the New York Times? Because that also exists, right? So who is the source? And then who's the author? Actually, AI, increasingly, there's fake bylines being put on news stories. But also sometimes if you check who the person is behind the content, you'll find that they're like deeply connected to like all of these, crazy conspiracy theories, and maybe they're not really the person you want to rely on. Sometimes you can do a reverse image search to see if an image is real before sharing. So you could have taken that Trump image that you saw and maybe put it back into Google, and it would have taken you to that original tweet that was like, this is fake, right? Another really good strategy is to check against other news organizations, principally mainstream media. So the big brands you've heard about, if it's in the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, and on CNN, it's probably true, right? So verifying across other news outlets. Just some other things, right? And I think probably the most important is probably the most too is like, is it a joke? Because sometimes there's a lot of humor in there and it's hard to tell, right? So my favorite example of this was satire that showed NBA players wearing Ruth Bader Ginsburg's like doily before a game. And like, that was like, a lot of people believe that, right? But that wasn't true, right? So it was like, is it a joke? And yes, right? And then I would say the other sort of key is kind of looking at what the information is behind the content that you're consuming. So sometimes when you click on a hyperlink, it goes to a mainstream news site or it goes to the census. And sometimes it goes to some website you've never heard of, right? And so understanding where the data is coming from to back up these claims is one shortcut to understanding what's real. And I think probably most important is understand how your own priors might affect the way that you're interpreting content. And it goes back to that original question of like, taking like, is my real sort of influencing what I believe to be reality, to sort of put it in the terms of the conversation. So I want to leave you with a couple of big questions that I do not have answers for. The first one that I am really curious about is, does generative AI really change the information disorder game? Because like, isn't information disorder just information disorder? Does it really matter if it's being made with like fancier software, right? We've had deepfakes for a really long time. Then what responsibility do big tech companies have? And Dr. Beck talked a little bit about this for moderating this content, right? And making sure it doesn't show up and influence the way that we might vote or think about the world. Should there be regulations, and who is doing the regulating? And then probably sort of the more existential question around how we relate to each other in society is, how might we rebuild trust in our information ecology, in our news media, and actually among each other, right? So that's kind of maybe we can talk about those and answer them all in our section. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Usher. That's so interesting. A little scary, but maybe we can all get to the point, or enough of us get to the point where we start to recognize what's real. And I hope at some point that the government will step in and do a little bit more to try to regulate this, because it is a very dangerous situation. I can't believe some of the things I've seen shared out there, and some of it I flatter myself and think I would recognize something fake. And sometimes you see an extra finger, as you said, or something's weird, something just doesn't look right. But we all know that there are some things that are at the point, and we're getting closer and closer to the point where it would be hard for anyone to distinguish just visually. And it's going to require some really serious critical thinking skills. And I think at some point, some kind of more, more significant intervention to ensure that, that we're not just flooded with misinformation, disinformation. And so very important topic. Thank you for that. All right, I believe if I remember right, next we have Dr. Esfahani. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. Well, take it away, Dr. Esfahani.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Esfahani. I'm in the economics department in the School of Business. And today I'm going to talk about an interesting topic in economics, and that's AI and the division of domestic labor. So for centuries, women have had a disproportionate burden of managing household labor, including domestic chores, child rearing, elder care, and various other caregiving responsibilities. And even though in recent years and in more developed countries, we can see that women are participating more in the paid labor force, the gender segregation of unpaid domestic labor continues to persist. So as we see remarkable advancements in AI, it raises the question about the potential impact that this evolution of domestic labor evolution is going to have on domestic labor and the longest standing issues of unpaid household work, which has again traditionally been fallen heavily on women. So now, why should we care about unpaid domestic work? I like this image by the Red Women's Workshop because it shows how important unpaid domestic work is for the whole economy. So many of us have seen a lot of newspaper articles, academic research, policy papers that are talking about how new technologies are going to impact jobs that are paid and what are we going to do to support these people who are going to lose their jobs. But there is not really that much research exploring the similar consequences in the case of unpaid domestic work. But as you can see in this image, unpaid work, also known as reproductive labor, is absolutely crucial. Societies cannot function without them. And no paid work can truly thrive if there's no one to prepare the meals, maintain the homes, care for children, and support family members. So here I have created a bar chart. I'm an economist. We love data. So you're going to see some data in my presentation today. So I have two panels. The top panel shows the amount of time men and women spend in paid activities. So these are typically jobs that are being done outside of homes. And the bottom panel shows the same, the amount of time that men and women spend doing for unpaid activities. These are the kind of jobs that are being done at home and they're unpaid. All of the blue bars are men, all of the pink bars are women, and each each vertical panel presents one country. So as you can see in the top panel, all of the blue bars are taller than the pink ones across all these countries, meaning that men on average across all these countries in my sample spend more time than women doing paid work. If you look at the bottom panel, you see the exact opposite. All of the pink bars are taller than the blue ones, meaning that women across all these countries spend more time doing unpaid activities than men. So again, domestic work is disproportionate between men and women. Now, if you aggregate the total amount of time men and women are spending on both paid and unpaid activities across the countries I showed you, you get these results. So if you look at, let's say, China, the very first panel I have here, you can see that women on average, that's the pink bar, spend more time than men doing paid and unpaid activities. If you look at the next country, Germany, you see the pink bar is again taller. The difference between the pink bar and the blue bar changes across countries. So in some countries like China, India, Greece, the difference is larger. And in some countries like Germany, Japan, Ireland, the differences are smaller. But across all these countries I have in my sample, except for Mexico, the pink bar is taller, meaning that women are doing more paid and unpaid activities. A recent Nobel Prize winner in economics, Claudia Golden, has a lot of research about this, and she talks a lot about how women are doing a lot of work. So even though they're spending less time in the labor market, but combined, they're doing a lot of work. There's this recent study in the UK and Japan that conducts an expert survey with a particular focus on exploring the possibility of robots assuming certain household tasks, particularly those that are less glamorous and more laborious in nature. So they categorized various household and caregiving responsibilities into about 17 tasks that are shown in this picture. Then they approached experts working in the field of smart technologies, specifically those relevant to domestic automation, in both UK and Japan, and they posed several questions to them, including one about the projected proportion of time that could be saved in the nation for each given domestic task, such as cooking, dishwashing, cleaning, within the next 10 years. The question was framed based on the existing technologies. So they're assuming the dishwashers, the washing machines, the robot vacuum cleaners, they're already taking all of that into account. So from the bar chart displaying the survey results, there are two significant observations that can be made. Firstly, experts anticipate a considerable level of automation across all tasks within the next 10 years, resulting in substantial time saving. Even for tasks that involve physical childcare, which is predicted to have the lowest level of automation, experts still estimate that about 20% of the time can be saved with the development of current and future technologies. So for many other household-related tasks, especially those that are more routine chores, experts perceive a higher proportion of automation. So the first key finding is that experts anticipate significant automation across various aspects of domestic labor. The second thing is when we consider the distinction between housework tasks, those are the ones that are more towards the left, and care tasks, the ones that are more towards the right, experts generally believe that housework, things like dishwashing, cleaning, cooking, grocery shopping, is more amenable to automation compared to care-related responsibilities. This suggests that housework, which constitutes unpaid work, can be automated to a significant content, even though with the acknowledgement that such automation may have transformative implications for our daily lives. Now, these findings raise numerous questions regarding the potential social consequences of automation in household tasks. As we have established, unpaid work occupies a substantial amount of time, and it plays a pivotal role in our lives. So who's going to benefit? Again, women are shouldering a larger share of these responsibilities. So routine domestic tasks, which are predominantly carried by women, are also the ones that are more amenable to automation. So in theory, considering the trajectory of automation, women would stand to gain the most if individuals and households could readily adopt these technologies. So this could potentially reduce the gender gap in domestic labor and offer time savings that are larger for women. Who else can benefit? Technology's impact goes beyond just the individual that's using it. Let me give you an example. Let's say there is a mom that's working outside of the home, and the dad is spending time with the child or children at home, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to entertain themselves, so they can consult ChatGPT, and it's probably going to come up with different ideas, making crafts, making cookies. And then let's say they decide to make cookies, and they check all the ingredients and they don't have one of the ingredients. So traditionally, before having ChatGPT, they could just call the mom and say, oh, we don't have sugar. What can we use instead of sugar? But now, instead of disturbing the mom who's working, focusing on her job, they can just ask ChatGPT, we don't have sugar. What can we use? And maybe substitute honey. I don't know. But the thing is, the mom isn't even using this technology, but she was indirectly benefiting from the interaction of the father and the child with ChatGPT, because she didn't get disrupted while she was working at her office. So as you can see in this simple scenario, technology can benefit both people that are using it directly and people who are not using it in an indirect way. Can AI help only with lowering the physical burden of domestic tasks? No, one key realization is that the use of AI can result in a lot of cognitive savings for individuals. For instance, the technology can help with scheduling, planning, decision-making, which can alleviate the cognitive load for managing these domestic tasks. So, this can lead to a more equitable sharing of responsibilities, again, within the households. But the next question is, do all women benefit? Probably not. Not everyone has the means or access to afford and adopt these technologies. So if emerging technologies come with substantial price tags, it could actually change, it could cause access inequality, where more affluent households are going to benefit from the time savings and potentially stop employing lower income individuals who are primarily women who assist with cleaning, cooking, and childcare. So these shiny robots might fulfill those tasks, increasing free time for wealthier households, while at the same time, they're going to cause job loss for poorer households. So not everyone is probably going to benefit from these advancements similarly. What are the other consequences? Some of the other consequences could be the dynamics that happen within the households and the relationships. A lot of the caregiving responsibilities that we do at home are actually a way for us to show love and to make relationships. So if robots are going to take on these responsibilities, the dynamics within the households and across family members is going to change. The other thing is these robots, in order for them, or these technologies, in order for them to perform their tasks well, they have to have access to a lot of information. So let's say you have a cooking robot, they need to know if you have any food allergies, if there is, if you are on a certain diet, they need to know a lot of things about your diet. Diet might be less significant, might be more significant, but when it comes to personal relationships, these information, all of this information that's being shared is all at a risk. So there is significant loss of privacy. Are there any other consequences? You could consider the potential for surveillance and power dynamics within the households. Take, for example, a smart doorbells like Ring. On one hand, they're really good because let's say a service provider is coming to your house. So instead of commuting all the way from work to your home to open the door for them, you can just give them remote access to the house. But on the other hand, they possess surveillance capabilities, allowing homeowners to monitor anyone entering their household, observing family members' movements, doorstep interactions, and everything else. So in situations where power imbalances exist within the family, or in case of abusive relationships, these emerging technologies pose significant risks when deployed in private homes. So technology can really help with the division of domestic labor, but at the same time, not everyone is going to benefit from this. And how we're going to incorporate all this AI within our houses is also really important, because there are consequences as well. I here at USC, I teach a course called Gender and Economics. This is one of the many topics we discuss in that class. So if you're interested in this topic, I'd be very happy to see you in my Gender and Economics class.
Thank you very much, Dr. Esfahani. Very interesting, very important. It feels crazy to me. Can I just say from a starting point, crazy to me that we are still talking about the gender gap here. That's been a topic of conversation for decades and decades. And everybody seems to understand that it's incredibly problematic, unfair, basically a human rights violation, I would think, in some sense. And yet we seem to make very little progress despite all that, and despite efforts, and also maybe because everyone acknowledges it and there aren't enough efforts. You know, there are some efforts, but then other folks treat it as an injustice that's just part of the world, like so many other injustices, right? And so I think it's so important that we talk about it, and I hope that maybe there can be some new avenues to try to repair the problem with AI, but it is a stubborn problem. And I think it's because there's so much lip service to it, but very little direct action, you know, very little meaningful engagement by enough people. Some people working very hard, and then other people who are willing to shrug and just accept it as the way the world is. Again, like so many other injustices. So incredibly important. This is it, everyone. This is the last one. my heart is breaking, but also I'm bubbling with excitement for you all. Dr. Blazer, just save me from myself. I'll turn off my, I'll mute myself and weep silently over here as we experience our last great panelist. Please take it away.
I will do my best. What an honor to be the last lecture of the of the last class for the summer. Let me pause for a moment and try to share my screen. How does that look? Are we looking at brains? Okay, we should be looking at brains. All right. So actually this is interesting. We've had such a diversity of perspectives just in the last 3 speakers. And I'm going to actually bring it right back around to Dr. Babka's topic, but from a very different perspective. So you're going to see some of the same themes, but I'm actually a professor I teach both in psychology and in neuroscience. So I teach classes in both of these 2 majors. I'm a comparative psychologist. And for about the last 100 years or so, comparative psychology has meant comparing the minds of human and non-human animals. So I study rats, I study fish, I study humans, I've studied various other animals like honeybees. And comparative psychology is actually just recently starting to take on a slightly new nuance in meaning, because there's a new mind out there that we've never really had to compare before, but now it's on the scene, and those are artificial minds as well. So I'm going to be looking at artificial intelligence from the perspective of a comparative psychologist, which deals a little bit with neuroscience and a little bit with psychology. So here we go. To start, I study comparative psychology from an evolutionary perspective, because evolution has a lot to do with the way we think and the way we behave. And so we're going to go back very, very far in time to where intelligence began, right? We're thinking about human and artificial intelligence. So let's look a little bit at the history of intelligence, right? So we're zooming out, we're looking back maybe some number of billions of years to early evolution. And I'm going to posit something. Intelligence started when reactions became predictions. Now, this is not a scientifically accepted truth. I made this up when I was writing this lecture. But I think there's validity to it, right? I think that something really important about the idea of intelligence is the ability to make predictions. Reactions, from a psychological perspective, are not quite as exciting, right? There are reactions everywhere, right? We have chemical reactions. Those are probably exciting to chemists, but I'm not one of those, right? I'm a psychologist. There are physiological reactions, right? I got stung by a bee. I'm having an allergic reaction to that. We have reflexes, right? Something pokes your finger, you touch a candle flame, you have a reflex reaction to pull your finger away. These are all really important things for our universe, right? For survival. These have been going on for billions of years in animals, but that's not where it started to get interesting, right? Where it started to get interesting was right around here in the bilaterally symmetric animals, when they started developing neurons that made connections that allowed them to react before the important event, right? So there is a survival advantage to something that reacts before you get bitten by that predator, right? You don't want to get bitten and then try to run away. Instead, it's much more useful to hear a sound that predicts there's going to be a predator and then hide and not get bitten in the first place, right? It's good to react to the taste of food, chew it, swallow it, have nutrition. But it's better to react to a stimulus that tells you, okay, food is about to be available, now you should go get it, right? It's far more helpful to react in advance of the event that's going to be important to you. And this seemed to start to occur about 500 million years ago. And so I mentioned I studied honeybees. The reason I'm interested in behavior in honeybees is because we split off about 500 million years ago, and still they seem to have very similar capabilities of prediction to those that humans have. So anything that split off before that is a little less clear. Sponges, not so good at making predictions. Insects can do it. And so my focus as a comparative psychologist is on learning. Learning is what allows us to make these predictions, right? Reflexes, reactions, those can be hardwired. Those we're born with. Our nervous system just builds them right in. But learning is the process through which we make predictions. How do we do that? The main way, the most important way in humans and vertebrate animals in general, and invertebrate animals, is something called associative learning. And associative learning is forming connections between new sensory inputs and new outputs, right? If you think about a reflex, you touch a hot flame, there's a sensory input of pain or of heat, then there's an output, a response where you pull your finger away from that hot stimulus, right? That can be built in. That's just a reaction. But if you learn that when that little red light is on the stove, you shouldn't touch it because it will hurt, that requires learning, right? We're connecting a new sensory input, the little red light on the stove that says hot surface, and we're learning that we shouldn't touch the stove when that happens, right? So we're connecting new input with new output, which is one way that we are allowed to connect causes with effects. Right? It's essentially the same idea. A new input with a new output is how we learn that some cause leads to some effect. And it gets a little bit more complicated in that we can actually detect probabilities, right? Effects don't always 100% follow the cause, but much of the time, 90% of the time, you can predict that something is going to happen given some other kind of predictive stimulus. So associative learning is a very kind of basic process, but it starts to scale up, right? As soon as you're detecting probabilities of one event based on another, it turns into something called statistical learning or perceptual learning. And this is where, based on statistical probabilities of some events or stimuli in the world, we begin to predict that other events are going to occur. And we use this to produce language, to recognize objects, to categorize things, to recognize people, faces that are familiar to us, to do all kinds of the really complicated, cool stuff that our brains are able to do. From there, this is a question, how far does it scale up, right? We know that we use statistical learning to produce language or to recognize objects. How about in our understanding of art or of ethics or of engineering? We don't know. We don't know how far it scales up, but it scales to some extent into the complicated things that we do. All right, so I'm going to give you an example of associative learning, and I would actually I'm going to pause for like 10 seconds to get everyone to open up your little chat menu because I'm actually going to require participation. So open your chats. Get ready to type. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see what you type or not because I've got full screen sharing going on, but we'll give this a try. Okay. Everyone ready? Not sleeping back there. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to give you a few words, and then I'm going to ask you to type something in your chat. Are you all ready? We'll say yes. Okay. Oh, no. Okay, here we go. Okay, what belongs in that blank? Super fast, as fast as you can. What is it? All right, I'm going to try to minimize. Oh, okay, I have a chat. Oh, look at all those shoes. You guys are so good at associative learning. Very nice. All right, I think I unshared my screen, so I'm going to go back and share it again. Oh, no, I am screen sharing. Okay. Sorry. Talking about AI, technology is still not my strong suit. There we go. You guys did a wonderful job. I assume it looked like most everyone had shoes. That was exactly what I would predict based on associative learning, right? You are doing a good job at predicting that shoes belongs in that position. I'm going to just minimize my screen again and check. I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure that I just gave away the next activity too. All right. There we go. I'm pretty sure that nobody put codpiece there, which would be a perfectly legitimate way to complete that sentence. It's just that it probably didn't come to mind, right? The association between socks and shoes is so much stronger than the association of socks and codpiece that probably nobody filled it in that way. All right, now I'm going to hope that you weren't paying enough attention so that when hang on, I'm readjusting my screen. So when I try this next one, I'm going to have you chat again. Maybe, here we go. Yeah, okay. I'm going to have you send one more thing in, right? I'm not feeling well. I think it's probably a flu. All I want to do is go home, cuddle up with a blanket or a cat and watch a movie. Maybe I'll have something warm to eat. Now you're going to fill in the blanks and you might have just seen it, but maybe you weren't paying attention. So we'll find out. How would you fill in the blanks to finish out this word? Type it in the chat. What am I seeing in the chat? A lot of soup and maybe some other things, right? However, when this activity works the way it's supposed to, we see a lot of soup and not a lot of soap or slap or slip or seep or step or stop, right? There are lots of words that could potentially fill in this set of blanks that typically people don't choose because you're primed to think about soup, right? So both of these are an example of associative learning where you've got one word that's associated with these other words, and so it just comes out more easily. Okay, now, for the most part, we have a good sense of how this associative learning works. It works through a process called error correction. If we understand how it works to some extent, actually from a neuroscience perspective, in the way that our neurons change in our synapses, we can computationally model it. I'm going to show you a nice example here, and then I'll explain why. So I don't know if you can hear, but you will at least be able to see.
The child will not stop.
What's going on with this little boy?
Tasting this. I keep telling him it's going to be gross, but he does not want to listen. So I'm going to let him find out for himself.
So this looks delicious, right? We all love chocolate. Oh, but that was a mistake, wasn't it? The poor kid, I know. I'm gonna go for one more second because it just like all comes puffing out. It's like,
Spit it out.
oh. Okay, so error correction applies here, right? So it starts with sensing or perceiving a stimulus, right? There's some kind of a stimulus input. For example, ooh, this smells like chocolate, which is delicious, right? These sensory input neurons activate associated output neurons like, I will put this in my mouth and eat it, right? Normally that's an appropriate response to the smell of chocolate. If the output is correct, then that association is strengthened, right? If the input leads to an output and that output is an appropriate one, then all is well, the association gets stronger. But in this case, the output was incorrect. And in that case, we go through something called an error correction algorithm, which adjusts the strength of that association so that the input isn't going to lead to that output next time. Right? So next time we see that thing of cocoa powder, we're not going to put it in our mouth and eat it. We adjust the output that goes with that input. Oh, but okay. So now finally, I'm getting to computers, right? So error correction is something that we've understood about how the human mind and rat mind and honeybee mind work for a long time. This is the mechanism by which a lot of associative learning happens. It's not actually a very difficult thing to implement in a computer, right? We've got some nice little equations that we can stick in and have these computer nodes. You can see my little X sensory inputs and my Y motor outputs, and we can update those connections using error correction algorithms that we've tested out with animals. It's not actually that hard to do, right? And these machine models can learn to predict what's going to happen, right? You can have sensory inputs, motor outputs, you can learn new associations. AI can replicate a lot of these basic associative processes pretty well. But it doesn't quite scale up, right? So for example, if you're bored sometime over the course of this week, you can go to this website called openworm.org. Now, why would anyone want to go to openworm.org? It's basically an artificial intelligence worm. So this little guy is C. elegans, who's just a tiny little simple worm. He makes a wonderful neuroscience model. So people study these worms because they actually have approximately 1,000 synapses that have all been perfectly mapped. So we know where all of the neurons are and where all of the synapses are in C. elegans. And scientists have been working to create basically a virtual model in which all of these synapses are represented by these little nodes to try to get a virtual worm that looks and behaves, not looks so much, but that behaves in ways that are just like a real worm. Now, for scale, right, this worm has fewer than 1,000 synapses, and we're still super excited that we're almost at a place that this can be modeled with artificial intelligence. So it's nothing like a human brain, right? We're talking about such a smaller scale, so much more simple. We can model it almost, but we're not even close to scaling it up to the size and complexity of even any kind of vertebrate, right? A mouse brain. And this leads to the question of interest to me as a comparative psychologist, which is, what's the difference, right? What is it that's happening when we try to scale these things up that isn't working? Is it just the number of connections, right? Is it just the fact that C. elegans has 1,000 synapses and humans have like hundreds of billions of synapses? And as soon as we get an artificial model that can compute that many billions of connections, that there won't be a difference anymore? Is that really all it is? Is it the actual matter by which the neurons are made? I mean, in a way that wouldn't really make sense. And yet that's one of the differences, right? We have squishy neurons and artificial intelligence has computerized neurons, right? Do they have to be squishy? Should that matter for any reason? I don't know why it would. Is it the wiring diagram, right? Is it the specific kind of which neurons are connected to which other neurons? We still don't understand enough about the wiring diagram of the human brain to really know how much that matters. It's wired pretty similarly to the brain of a mouse, though. We know that much, right? But not necessarily the same as an artificial intelligence system. So what is it? And so as we think about this difference, I'll introduce you here to Walter. Walter is a goldfish. Unlike a human infant, unlike a robot, Walter can survive on his own from the day he hatches from an egg, right? The parent fish can lay an egg and swim away, and from the time he starts developing in an egg, Walter has everything he needs to survive, seek out food, reproduce, lead to the next generation of goldfish. That's pretty amazing. In some ways, that's way more intelligent than humans, which clearly can't do that, right? Walter can recognize familiar objects and learn from experience. Walter is able to form categories. He's able to make predictions about the world. He's able to remember them. He can remember where home is. He can remember when a predator is going to come. He can do a lot of the basic associative learning that's like what we do. Walter has squishy neurons. Why is it that you can write an essay on artificial intelligence and humanity and Walter can't? Is it just the number of connections? Is it the wiring diagram? We don't know, right? We still don't know. And okay, so we're gonna do a quick comparison, right? So we're gonna group you and Walter together, right? You, me, all of us and Walter, the fish. We have some things in common that might very well be important, right? We have 200 million plus photoreceptors. That's a lot, right? It depends on the species, more or less, depending, but we've got a bunch of photoreceptors. We've got a bunch, thousands of auditory receptors, tens of thousands if you're a bat, which, by the way, I have my students read What Is It Like to Be a Bat as well. They have millions of auditory receptors, olfactory receptors, taste receptors, touch receptors. Okay, so we're talking about maybe billions of sensory receptors in this organism, and internal sensory receptors telling us what our muscles are doing, what our current like internal state is. Every second of every day, they are active, right? We're getting constant sensory input from the world, and we have to constantly filter and attend and prioritize this input. So it's just coming in all the time from billions and billions of sources. In contrast, current artificial intelligence still has a truckload of training stimuli, right? They scrape the web, they feed in YouTube videos, they collect all kinds of information. But it's not just like constant information from the world. Usually it's filtered by humans, right? Humans are coding this information, they're labeling, they're deciding what input to put in and what input not to. Often they have to take the input and like do something to it first to tell the artificial intelligence what to pay attention to or what matters, right? So people are going through and like circling things or clicking on things to tell these systems like what is the elbow or what is this letter or what is being said here. And so if you think about, you have to do those CAPTCHA, I prove you're not a robot when you log into a system. It's asking you to do something that these systems actually still can't do very well, right? Identify a crosswalk. And much of the training is like trying to teach them how to do this, right? What are the crosswalks? More recently, I think this is super fun, people have started to train artificial intelligence on baby cams. So a bunch of like cognitive psychologists have started putting helmets with cameras on their babies, and using that video and auditory input to feed into AI deep learning systems to try to see whether the robot models, right, whether the deep learning systems will follow more human-like developmental trajectories of learning if they're learning from the stimuli that human babies are getting. That said, we're training these models on several hundred hours of video, which seems like a lot, but several hundred hours of video is basically a few hours a week from a couple of babies, right? So you have 3 or 4 babies, do a few hours a week, and that adds up to all of this video data that we're pumping into these models. But it's nowhere near what the real babies are getting, right? This is like a tiny little slice of the actual developmental input that a baby is getting. Spoiler alert, so far, they don't seem to learn very much like human babies at all, even when we train them on baby cam data with the same kinds of video and audio that babies are getting. But of course, they're not getting the tastes and the smells and the touch and all of those other kinds of stimuli that go along with the video and the sound. So we have very different kinds of sensory input. We're also getting different kinds of feedback, right? So you, me, Walter, often we don't get any feedback at all. We're just getting like drenched in sensory input, and it's our brain's job to make sense of it, right? It's just either making a prediction and having it be correct or having it be incorrect. Sometimes the feedback is survival related, right? Oh, that cocoa powder did not taste good at all. Let's not eat any more of that, right? So it tastes good, or it makes us sick, or we get social approval, or we get cold or hot, right? Something that gives us survival feedback. And then social feedback, right? Praise, parenting, and so on. With bots, human trainers have to actually explicitly provide the answers, right? Or indicate whether something is correct or incorrect. They can't really produce much useful output unless humans are specifically involved in kind of directing and generating the feedback. So it's a very different kind of motivational system. And last, and in my opinion, the most important, is the self-directedness of learning or agency. So humans, rats, bees, even fish, have motivation to seek out particular sensory inputs, right? Sensory input that signals food, comfort, safety, reproductive opportunities. We are highly motivated to find these things and to repeat behaviors that gain access to these sensory inputs. And then we prioritize which inputs to seek, right? So if we're injured, we reduce the priority on seeking food, and we increase the priority on dealing with like reduction of that injury. If we're starving, then we put more priority on seeking food and less priority on safety or injury reduction. So we have all of these stimuli that we're motivated to find. We have to prioritize which ones we need to go after. And we have to identify the questions, the problems, the inconsistencies that we're going to pursue, right? Which paths are interesting, which are useful. We seek out things that seem to actually give us control over the world, right? What behaviors allow us to cause effects to happen and which ones don't? Which stimuli seem to have important outcomes and which one don't? We share this with Walter, a simple goldfish, but we don't share it with most artificial intelligence models. This is something that people are actively working to implement in AI. One of the questions that I might ask in our discussion section is whether that's a good idea, right? Do we want motivated, self-directed artificial intelligence with agency, or don't we, right? Well, that's a good thing to talk about. Okay, so I will sum up very briefly the gist of my comparison, right? So we've got the bot, we've got Walter, we've got humans. Bots have digital neurons. They can scale up pretty big, right? They're getting bigger and bigger every year. But their motivation is quite narrow, right? It's human defined. We have to tell them what to look for, what to use. They require extensive training. And so far, agency and attention are kind of still in progress, right? We're thinking about it, but it's not there yet. We, and Walter the fish, have squishy neurons, but we have a lot more of them than Walter does. We share survival motivation to seek out certain kinds of stimuli. And of course, humans probably have more than just that, but we share a certain ability to prioritize what we want out of the world. We have agency and we have attention. But in terms of what we're capable of doing, right, if you look at our math skills, right, really the bot wins. Sorry. I mean, Walter can barely count to 4. Humans, you know, we outdo Walter, and yet for the most part, artificial intelligence is going to win on math most of the time. So far, artistic capabilities of both robots and goldfish are not so impressive, but humans can do a pretty good job. Fish, humans, all can identify crosswalks in a way that apparently artificial intelligence systems still can't, because you can prove that you're not a robot that way. One of the other questions that we're going to ask about when we discuss, maybe in a few days, is our moral standing, right? At this point, obviously, artificial intelligence has no moral standing. Of course, it's a computer. Okay, and neither do fish, right? We eat them, they're delicious. So we get to define ourselves as the ones that have moral standing. On what basis, though, right? Because if we say Walter doesn't get to have moral standing because he can't do math or use language, then that's kind of a problem for artificial intelligence, which can. And if we say artificial intelligence has no moral standing because it doesn't have squishy neurons, and we do, then that's kind of a problem when we think about Walter. And so how do we define who does or doesn't get to have moral standing? And then when it comes all the way around to the big question of consciousness, it remains the big question. We just don't know, right? At this point, AI, probably not. At this point, I would say Walter, probably not, with maybe italicized. and you know, most of us probably have it most of the time, but that is why we call it the big question, right? It's still the big question. So where does this leave us? Many features that make us different from AI, we share with other species, right? Squishy neurons, lots of sensory input, agency, evolved motivational systems, self-direction, attention. We share these with rats, with fish, with bees. many features that make us different from other species. We're like, okay, well, we're different because we have language and we have art and we have math. We share that with AI, right? So we can create complex grammatical sentences. I wouldn't necessarily say that they can produce art, but you know, they might be getting there before too long. They can solve mathematical problems. Ultimately, I liked that quote that Dr. Babka started with by Pablo Picasso, who said, computers just give us answers. But I'm going to finish out the last lecture of the last week by saying, no, these computers are asking, well, they're producing way more questions than they are answering them for us. It just leaves us with an interesting new tool to study a very old question. So these are questions I'm just leaving us with to kind of start you thinking for discussion questions next time, right? How important are these differences? What do they mean? And so with that, I will conclude, and I look forward to talking with many of you later on in the week.